So I should have that open here. So I'm not sure how well this will play back on the screen capture. And I know this isn't going to be everybody's style, but there's a few techniques that I think will be beneficial to you. So this is kind of broken down into 3 different parts that I'm going to show. First of all is how to do this kind of color splash in the background, and also how to reveal individual characters. So on the left I've got the guitarist with Metallica, and on the right I've got Lawrence Fishburne from The Matrix. Just one is a static image that's just been brought in, but Lawrence Fishburne is a standalone composition, so that you can bring in elements that are constantly looping, and see the way his head bounces up and down, rather than, you know, as well as having static images, you can have animated compositions brought into your main composition. If this doesn't make sense, don't worry, it should do in about 20 minutes when we've covered everything. To create the splash in the background, I've used Brush Easy watercolor splatters, and I installed those brushes inside in Photoshop. So I downloaded that. If you remember from week 1 or 2 in class, we downloaded a .abr file. ABR stands for Adobe Brush. When you download the ABR file inside of Photoshop, to install your brushes, you go to your brush tool on the toolbar, and up here there's a cog, and you can choose load brushes. That'll open a pop-up window, and I've actually given you this file in the zip folder. So in my desktop, in, let me see, Creative Tech, inside of here there's a brushes folder, and that's the file that we want to bring in, and you just open it. I've already installed it, so I'm not going to do it again, but for some reason Adobe puts the newest brush you install at the very bottom. That sometimes confuses people. Just be aware of that. So what I did was I made a new canvas 1920 by 1080, and when that opens up, I'm working off my laptop, so I don't have the screen space that I'd like to have, but I don't think it'll be a problem today. So that's the brush size that I'm going to use. First of all, in your layers, we don't want to do that on a white background. We want to create the brush on a standalone layer, so we can actually delete the white background, and the top color here is going to be the color that we use. If it's not to your liking, you can always change it inside of After Effects with the tint. I saved that as a ping file, a .png. The reason I did that was it will save the transparency in the background. Okay, and I think I called that brush file. I'll see it here in my folder. Sorry, this is just taking a minute to open up. If I go to my desktop, Creative Tech, I saved it in here into images, and it's called brushmask.png. So I'm going to do this from scratch inside of After Effects. I'll make a new composition. It's 1920 by 1080. I'm just going to make sure this is recording, because I don't want to be talking for a half an hour and then realize I didn't hit the record button. Yeah. Okay, I think it's recording, so I'll keep going on. So this is my duration. I'll change this later. I'm not really sure how long I want it to be, but obviously it's not going to be longer than 20 seconds. And it's 1920 by 1080. I'm going to import that file that I saved, import file, and it's called brush mask. I'll bring it in here. I'm going to drag that down onto the timeline. Now, that's just going to be static. To make it a little bit more interesting, you can put a very easily put a kind of a warping effect to make it look like lava or fire. And in effects, there's one called turbulent displace. Turbulent displace. You can drag and drop that onto your image. Okay. Now, what we want to do, you'll see if you move the evolution of the turbulent displacement, you can see it warping in real time on the screen. What we're going to do is just animate that. Now, we don't want it, like I'll show you if we put in too much, if we keyframe that at the very, remember we're putting in our start keyframe here, and if I move ahead to the end of the timeline, if I have that at like something like 9 rotations, 9 full rotations, it's probably going to be very, very fast. Now this isn't playing back in real time, it needs to render first of all. I suppose I was going for something more subtle because we want viewers to read the text and look at the pictures. This is more like a kind of a background image. Like this is going to be quite fast. So I think I had just given it 1 rotation. So again, I put in a keyframe for the start. I'm going ahead to the end, and I'm just going to put in 1 rotation, like so. So that will, I'm not going to wait for it to play in its entirety, but it should be a lot more subtle. Like if we play that much back. Okay, so it's a slower type of warp. I think the part then I had brought in was some text. I can't even remember what I put on in my video. If I jump back in here, live in concert. Okay, Kirk and Lawrence live in concert, if you can believe it. So go to my text tool. I think the font I'm using is Futura. I'm not going to get into the entire look and feel. I didn't spend ages doing the kind of branding for this. It was kind of, as you can see, it's kind of thrown together quite quickly. I might change the font color to white and just type in live in concert. And you could change the spacing or whatever if you wanted it more bolder or whatever. The other thing, the effects I put on this was typewriter. So there's an effect called typewriter, and we can drag and drop that on. Now, just remember, wherever the playhead is, that will be the starting point of the animated keyframes for typewriter. So I don't want it to start immediately, so I've moved the playhead to around 1 second or 25 frames, and we should see that it'll start from here. Now, if you want to adjust the speed of the playback of the typewriter, just keep scrolling down until you see the keyframes, until you make those larger. It's under range selector, so you'll have to dig deep until you find the large keyframes, and then you can adjust the tempo of how you want it to be. I've said this in the assignment, and I say it to all students, you don't want your animations taking 4 seconds, but at the same time you want them snappy, but if it's too fast it's going to be strobe-like, and you don't want that either. Okay, so that's that much. I'm going to lock these 2 layers so I don't move them by accident. And the next thing I'm going to do is bring in the guitarist, and he's also been saved as a ping file. I just grabbed him online. I just typed in guitarist and ping, and I'm going to position him somewhere like this. Okay, now there's 2 effects that I've applied. I'll jump back to the video. If you see here, he's white at the start, and he's also being revealed. So he's going from solid white while he's being revealed by a mask. And I'll show you those 2 techniques. It's quite simple. We are putting a tint effect on the guitarist. So up here in my effects panel, go to tint, drag and drop that onto the guitarist, and we could have this guitarist go from red, and you could have something like that. We'd keyframe the amount to tint. I went with white. It's up to you. You could have both if you wanted to. Okay, so we are going to keyframe the amount to tint, and I can put the keyframes up here if I wanted to. So it's going to start at 100%, and let's say we can adjust this later on, but it's going to fade off like so. Okay, and we're also going to introduce a mask. If you remember, we did it in week 3. Masks can reveal something or just show a specific part of the image. So layer, make sure you've got the layer you're working on selected, and then go layer, mask, new mask. Wherever the mask is that's the part that's revealed. So here we would see the guitarist just fade in if it was 1/2. You could also, some people might choose just to do it like that. If you're doing it like that, you might want to have some feather on it. I'll zoom in a bit closer, and that way you're getting a little bit of feathering on it rather than a harsh line. So that's with feather, and that's without feather. Without feather, it's just like that kind of harsh line. The mask path, I'm not going to do it like that. What I'm planning on doing, I'll just zoom out a little, is I'm going to change the mask shape by clicking on shape here. I'm going to change that to be an ellipse, so it's more of a rounder one. And what we're going to do is just keyframe a start and end to this. So that's going to be my finish point when everything's visible. I'll put in a keyframe here for mask path at the end, and this is going to be the start part. So here we can drag down this ellipse. So we should get a reveal as it's changing from white solid like so. Now, the difference of 1 or 2 keyframes can make a big difference in the timing. So I might just adjust the tint. I don't want it to go fully visible. So like, as you know, I spoke about overlap in one of the classes. As it's becoming more and more visible, that's when we want the white dying off. Okay, so I'm not going to spend ages either like on that, but that's the idea. That's 2 effects. You've got your mask and your tint happening there. All right, so pause all of this for a minute because I want to bring in the Lawrence Fishburne character. So if we jump to Firefox and look at the character here, he's in constant motion, the loop character. So I've provided, sorry, just jump back to After Effects. I've provided a Photoshop file, and I'm going to import that. So I'm going to go File, Import File, and it's called here Lawrence Head Bounce. And I'll bring that in. Now, when we're bringing in something from Photoshop, I was saying it's important to do composition retain layer sizes. I'll explain why when I bring it in. So this is the composition that we've brought in. I'm going to double click on that and we can see it here. The reason why I always choose composition retain layer sizes is because it keeps the size of each of the layers to its exact size. So for example, if I just isolate the head, this part isn't vitally important, but it's just really to explain the theory behind it. It knows it doesn't provide a load of blank space all around Lawrence Fishburne's head. The layer is only the size of where the pixels are at its widest and highest points. Okay, that makes it a lot easier to keyframe, rotate, animate, because the pivot point is probably going to be on his, probably his nose rather than down here in some blank space. So don't worry if you don't fully understand that part, but if you do, it's worth always choosing it as composition retain layer sizes. Okay, so what we're going to do is make this composition just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go to composition settings, and I want to change the height of it to something like maybe 1400. Okay, just gives us a bit more breathing room because we want to animate his head moving up and down. So I'm going to hide. I'm just going to organize these a bit better. So we're going to have it like body, neck, head, and I want to just scale up his neck a little bit. To do that, I want to adjust where the pivot point is on his neck, like so, even like that. I'm going to go to scale, unlock the ratio constraints, and just scale up his neck a little bit. I know it looks way out of, it looks skewed, the ratio isn't right, and I've always told you never scale things up, but it's just for a little bit of background. And from here, I'm just going to, if you ever see movement and you don't see the mouse moving, I'm using the arrow keys. So I've chosen the arrow key and the toolbar, which is V for shortcut, and then I'm using the up-down arrow keys just to position things like one frame at a time. Now that his neck is a bit bigger, it gives us the leeway to, move his head from here down to somewhere like here. All right. So what I'm going to do is go to the position of his head. That's going to be his start point. I'm going to move ahead 10 frames, and then I'm going to position his head down like so. So we can duplicate these keyframes, so his head will be bouncing up and down. I might scale up his head as well, just to make it look a bit wackier. And in doing so, I might need to the placement of this. So that's my start point. That's my end point. Maybe that's a bit too much. Something like so. Okay. I can duplicate these keyframes. So I can select them. I can do Command C to copy them. And I want 10 frames between all of them, so I'll move ahead to frame 20 and do paste. And from here, move ahead onto frame 40. Paste. So I can grab all of these to save myself more time. Move ahead to frame 60. And so on. So this is the idea that we get, and I will go through the graph editor in a minute and come back to this at the end. I want the bounce smoother, but for the moment I don't want to rush into doing the keyframe editor when I haven't covered it yet in the graph editor, but that's the idea. So you could have as many sub animations going on in this. Like we could have, if we had his arm separated in Photoshop, we could have that rotating, whatever possibilities you want to have in your sub composition, you can have them. This composition is called Lauren's head bounce. So I'm going to go back to my main composition. I should actually rename this. So I'll go to composition settings, and I'll call this maybe intro screen. Right, and I'm going to drag in the Lawrence Fishburne head bounce one, and I'm going to scale down this. Now if you wanted to, you could use your rulers. Command or turns on or off your rulers, and we could try and establish some kind of benchmark as to what kind of height in this virtual world the characters are. We don't want them blocking the text. I'm just going to use the arrow keys to position him down so that his heels. So I can scale him up a little bit more, maybe like so. Okay, I'll turn off my rulers, and again we'll see that the animation that we have for Lawrence Fishburne still works here. Okay, I'm going to apply a similar effect for the tint. What you can actually do is, to save time, you can grab effects from one layer and apply them to another. So what I mean by that is the guitarist has that tint effect. I can copy that by selecting it, right-clicking. Actually, it doesn't provide it. I'm just going to do Command C. That should copy the tint, and I'm going to make sure that I have Lawrence selected. I'm going to do Command V, and that should paste the keyframes. If you don't get that, you can just do it manually, but I've just done that as a time-saving mechanism. I'm not going to copy the mask because it will probably place the mask over where the guitarist is, and that'll be too much work trying to readjust that. What I'm going to do is just do a different style of mask. So layer, mask, new mask. I'm going to leave it as square, and I am going to make it a bit smaller by just dragging down some of the points from it. And I'm going to just straighten that up a bit. Okay, so under masks for Lawrence Fishburne, put in a keyframe for mask path, and I am going to move this up like so, so it looks like he's kind of being scanned. So we should kind of get that reveal. As he's changing from white to solid, the mask scans up, and as it gets to the top, I might just put in a hold there for like a couple of frames. So remember to put in your pause frame over here, it's not the clock keyframe, and move ahead. And these masks are a little bit tricky. I'm shift selecting the points that I want, and I'm dragging it fully down. So we should get that kind of a swipe. We can adjust the timing of it later on. I mightn't have him the tint fade just so quickly, so what I'm going to do is go down to my effects, to tint, and just delay the tint changing so that it's constantly white, and then as it scans down it removes. And then we should have a bit of overlap here. What we can do is, so that everything isn't happening at once, we don't want the text, guitarist, and Lawrence Fishburne appearing on screen all at the same time. So what I can do is just move this entire composition across on the timeline. So that's not going to start yet. So when the guitarist is, remember I was saying, try not to have any dead time. You don't want to have it that the text doesn't start until the guitarist is just fully finished. So what I might do is just I'll unlock these, move the text ahead on the timeline. So as guitarist is almost revealed, then the next one is Lawrence Fishburne, and then the text is coming out. Something like that, okay? And we've also got the nice subtle animation going on in the background. You could always, if that's too vivid and you find that it's taking away the viewer's attention, you could reduce the opacity. You could also add some Gaussian blur to that. So it kind of creates a fake sense of depth. Okay. Again, the more effects that you've got on it, it's not going to play it back in real time. So it won't, I suppose you could think of it as buffering. When the green line is fully done, that's when it will be able to play it back at the speed that it's going to show in your final video. So I won't wait for it all to render, but just see how that looks. Okay, if I had more time, I'd probably make this snappier. I'm not sure if it's my computer playback, but yeah, I think those transitions could be a little bit faster for the character reveal. Anyways, so that's the first part. The next part I want to show is the kind of, these are kind of known as idents, those kind of pop-ups that you see with branding for whether it's Sky Atlantic or Channel 4 or BBC. And this is what I'm going to do. So I sent on a couple of links on the Slack channel, and that was to do the work with the graph editor and also to use trim paths in After Effects. I'm going to go through those now, but this is going to be a standalone composition. So I'm going to go to Composition, New Composition, 1920 by 1080, and I'll call this Guitar Ident. So yeah, ident's what the kind of term in industry is short for, like identity or branding. Okay, so I'll do the kind of boxes first of all because they're straightforward. So I'm going to make a new shape layer. So layer, new shape layer, and I'm going to choose the box from up here and make this is going to be like a cross. I'm going to animate this, so we want to make sure that the pivot point is at the top. Okay, to be certain, we can zoom right in and make sure the crosshairs are right on top of that. The idea being that when we scale this, so if I go to my rectangle, to my, let me see, actually I can just go here to the scale, that when we're scaling, we can animate the y-axis of this. So that's obviously going to be 0 for the start point, and I might move ahead maybe something like 40 frames. And that's going to be my end point. That should animate. Well, for some reason it didn't accept the first keyframe, so I'll go back here, put it in, okay, and animate it. Now that doesn't have to be 100%, it could be 120, 150, 300%, however you want it to be. Okay, so at this stage, what I want to do is look at the easing, because this animation is happening at a linear cycle, and we can make it a little bit more interesting if we use the graph editor so that it doesn't all happen at the same time. It looks a bit more natural if we do that. So I'm going to go to the graph editor, I'm going to go to scale, and what I want to do is change this from linear to Bezier so that I've got more control over it. To do that, I choose one of the keyframes, change it to Bezier like that, and by doing that I can speed up. Let's just preview this. Okay, you can apply these to everything, so I'll just change that. This is just a bit tricky when it's some of them you can turn off the X and Y, but not for scale. So okay, all right, and that's what we have. So please try and use the graph editor in all of your animations. It can be used in opacity, scaling, positions, even on effects, okay? And it makes things look a lot crisper, I think. So let's just say we wanted to add in another shape. I can duplicate this, so Command D duplicates it. Let's just see that. And with this one, I'm going to rotate it minus 90 degrees. I can just type that in. And I'm going to drag this down here. It doesn't need to, if I go to my keyframes for this second one, which should have been saved, turn off the graph editor for a moment. This one doesn't need to be as long, and we don't want this one starting until, if I turn on my rulers, this one shouldn't start until the that part is finished. So I'm just going to adjust the timing slightly. So the idea is that one starts when the other transitions past it. Okay. You might find that when you're copying some of these, that like if you keep an eye on this bar, it's reversing, so it's moving outward and then it kind of pops back. So I'm just going to check on that inside the graph editor. Okay, so let's check that out. Okay. All right. The next part that I'm going to do is a semicircle. So I'm going to lock these so I don't move them by accident. I'm going to go layer, new, shape layer, and I'm going to add an ellipse. I'm holding down the shift button when I create this, so it keeps the radius, working, so we don't get a kind of a skewed width and height. And I can scale this up a bit bigger if needs be. Okay. And I'm just going to put the pivot point in to the center so it doesn't mess with it. Okay, so in the drop down list we want to go to the ellipse, and we want to make sure that the fill is the opacity is turned down. Now, some people make the mistake of turning down the opacity in the main transform section. It's not. It's under the ellipse section where the fill is, and we'll bring that down because we don't want it to be solid. We are also going to increase the stroke width of this, and I'll just change the color to be white so it matches this. Okay, so what we're going to do here is have this circle get drawn also. I'll just line this up a little bit better. Okay, and I'll scale this up a tiny bit more. Something like that. I'm not going to spend ages getting that perfect, but you get the idea. So what we can do here is, if we choose the ellipse, this was in one of the links that I told you to check out, but anyways, I'll go over this from scratch. With the ellipse selected, there's an add section here, and you should really experiment with these. There's loads of options, and for typography within motion graphics, they can give you some really nice results. The one we want to add is trim paths, and with trim paths it enables you to animate where the circle starts from and how it draws. Okay, so if I want it drawing from the bottom to the top, I can do that. What we need to do though is first of all offset it. So there's an offset radius down here, and once that is set up, you can figure out what's your end part going to be and what's your start part going to be. So that's, if I just click off that for a bit, I need to adjust my offset. Probably should be 180, I suppose. Alright, something like that. So I need to figure out what part am I going to animate, the end or the start. So I think I'm going to, I want it coming from the bottom. So what I'm going to do is put in a keyframe for the end and put in a keyframe further on so that it goes up to 50%. If we scrub back the timeline, we get something like that. Okay, so really nice. If you do that in combination with the ease, so like I was saying, you can apply the graph editor easing to everything, even that circle, semicircle, how it's drawn. I can choose the graph editor for that, put in a Bezier curve for both of them, and whether, if you want a slow draw or a fast draw, it's up to you, but it's really just about experimenting. And so let's just see. I might even pull that out further. Sometimes when you extend your keyframes, not in the graph editor, you might need to go back in, like say that's going to be a little bit warped. So okay, so that's that, and I'm happy with the timing and the overlap. The other part that I did was I brought in a guitar, which was a vector. So I'll bring that in, file, import file, and it's in my vectors folder. So you see the way I've got a lot of different folders. You might think I'm over the top, but if you're working on a bigger project, it does make sense. So I'll bring in the EPS folder, and I'm going to bring that into the scene. Remember, I said vectors you can scale them up as large as you want, but you make sure that you turn on the continuous vector button here where my cursor is, and that will keep the quality. I'm going to rotate this. Okay, position it, scale it up a little. Okay, and we can put in a fade with this. You could do the tint, you could do the mask, or you could just do an opacity tint. So let's see. I think I'll just do opacity. So have it start at 0, put in a keyframe, move ahead in the timeline. And you could also do the ease on that as well if you wanted to. Let's just see how that's looking. Okay. The other part then was text. I can't remember what I had in mind. 9 p.m. sharp. Okay. So again, put in your text. Mine is set to white on a white background, not the best. So double click on that, change my color. Okay, so I'm using the arrow keys here just to nudge things into place. You could also, if you wanted to expand the lettering or the spacing between it, you could. Again, totally up to you. Put the typewriter effect on it. To your effects. Typewriter. Remember, it's going to put it in wherever it is in the timeline, so probably here is a good place to start, just when that white bar has appeared. So I'll drag and drop that onto my text, and we can dig down and look for those keyframes to make it shorter. Okay. Okay, so previewing that, that's what we have. Okay, so if you can see on the one that I did, it kind of rotates in. And that's what we're going to do when we bring them all in together. So the compositions that we have, we've got Lawrence head bounce, we've got the intro screen, and we've got our guitar ident. So I'm going to go to my intro screen, and I'm going to go to intro screen, and I can drag and drop my guitar ident in here. Obviously, I don't want it that size. I don't want it starting there and then. So probably live in concert. Give the viewers some frames to check it out. Okay. So what we're going to do is, first of all, I'll go fully and just see, because I want to adjust the scale and the positioning of it. All right, and yeah, what I want to do here is put in a rotation on it. So if I go to rotation, I'm going to change that to -90, put in a keyframe, and move ahead to somewhere like here and change that to 0. So as that composition plays back, it rotates into place. And I'm also going to go to the graph editor for those rotations, just to have it ease in. So choose the keyframes, change them to Bezier, and fix it to the way or to the style that you want. If you're looking at this, if you've got this kind of long lead in, so by this stage it's nearly fully rotated if you see where the cursor is, but this kind of long lead in, it just gives that kind of very subtle movement towards the end at a slow pace. So it kind of rotates it fast, and then it's just like, if you want to think of it as kind of running out of energy towards the end. So I could drag that on and just adjust these curves to extend that kind of effect. Okay, I'll get out of my graph editor. So this is what we have. When the text finishes, it shows, gives the viewer, a few seconds to focus on things. So, and then the text comes in. What we could do is blur out the background so that the audience focuses on, the ident. So rather than applying a blur on everything, here's a handy tip. We can put in what's known as an adjustment layer. New adjustment layer, and it puts in this layer here. Whatever effects we apply to this adjustment layer will be applied to the layers underneath it. So if I put on a Gaussian blur on that, it'll happen to everything except for the guitar ident, which we don't want to go near. Obviously we don't want the Gaussian blur to kick in until say just a little bit before the ident comes in. So first of all, I need to apply the blur to the adjustment layer. I need to put in a keyframe, and I'll move ahead, say 25 frames to here, and then ramp up the blur. So, this is probably obvious, but you're creating the depth. There's blur on the background, so it makes the ident look sharper and there's more focus on that. And that's really it. I think the only thing that I said I wanted to go back to was the curve editor, the graph editor for the bobblehead. So if I go back to, for some reason it's not letting me, yeah, okay, so I want to go to the Lawrence bounce one, and these head bounces are happening in a linear way. What I want to do is go to the graph editor and choose position. I'm not interested in the X movement because the head isn't moving from side to side, it's only moving up and down. So for position, and position only, I wish it would allow this in scale and rotation, but with position you can right click on it and choose separate dimensions, and then you can just focus on the Y. So with these, you could almost bulk drag or select all the keyframes and change them to be Bezier. This would have been a lot easier if I did it by copying and pasting them, but anyways. A little bit tedious, but the idea is that the head will stay at the top when it's at the top for a bit longer, and when it's down at the bottom it'll stay at the bottom for a bit longer. So you get a more natural movement, like a ball bouncing, like basketball bouncing. I'm not going to do that with all of them, but if we preview this, okay, you get a difference in it. Alright, and then because we've made that effect to the composition, if we jump back, any changes I make here will be visible. For example, if I put the letter E, for example, on here, that will be visible. If I go to my intro screen, the E is still visible there. So whatever changes you make to your sub composition, the changes to the head bounce, adding in that letter, whatever you do will be visible in the main one. This is known as nesting, bringing in sub compositions into your main one. The main reason, it makes it a lot easier. You kind of compartmentalize your work so that everything's in a kind of a separate folder. You want to change the guitar ident, it's in its own composition. You want to change Lawrence Fishburne, it's in its own composition. Otherwise, what you end up with is 800 layers down inside one composition, and it just becomes very hard to work with, especially if you need to change the timing of one of them. So that is it. I hope this has recorded. I hope everybody's doing okay. Stay sane, and I suppose, yeah, keep busy on this. Think of it as something for your show reel, and do run it by me. I got that in the brief that I'd like you to kind of show it to me a couple of times. The stages of your work, so I can give you feedback on it. You can. I think Slack should work. If there's any of you that are friendly with people that haven't signed up for the Slack channel yet, will you send them a message? Tell them this is live, and yeah, if there's anything that I come across that I think will be interesting for you, I'll upload it. If there's any tutorials, or some effect that you might have seen, send me a screenshot on Slack. We can all discuss it. It might be beneficial to your classmates as well. So yeah, okay. Take it easy.